There are cities in Texas right now where the reservoirs are sitting at 9% capacity, home prices are falling off a cliff, and local officials are quietly telling people to start making other plans. Nobody's running this story on the evening news. Nobody's putting out emergency alerts on your phone. But entire towns across the Lone Star State are watching their water vanish and their property values go with it. We're talking about a city that lost a third of its population in 6 years. A retired rancher who spent $30,000 drilling a backup well and still thinks his house is worthless. A town that publicly accused its own neighbor city of stealing its water supply. And a place where the mayor literally called his community the canary in the coal mine. Then watch the canary drop. If you enjoy watching the American real estate market do things that shouldn't be physically possible, go ahead and subscribe. It only takes a second, and honestly, you're going to want to see what we cover next week. These are 11 Texas cities that are completely drying up as home prices freefall. Number 11, Sweetwater. Sweetwater sits about 40 miles west of Abilene in Nolan County, surrounded by flat ranch land and wind turbines that spin so slowly in the summer heat, you'd think they were decorative. The town built its economy on two things, oil and wind energy, and right now neither one of them is doing Sweetwater any favors. The population has dropped over 5% since the 2020 census, settling in around 10,000 people. And while that might not sound catastrophic on its own, pair it with Zillow's forecast of a nearly 7% decline in home values, and you start to see the picture forming. Median homes here are sitting under $100,000, and even at that price point, buyers are not exactly lining up. Part of the problem is location. Sweetwater is far enough from any major metro that remote workers have no reason to move there, and close enough to Abilene that anyone with ambition eventually makes the 40-minute drive and doesn't come back. The water situation adds another layer of worry. West Texas sits over the Ogallala aquifer, which has been declining steadily for decades across the Texas Panhandle and High Plains. The Panhandle Groundwater Conservation District confirmed the trend is about a foot of decline every year, and some projections suggest parts of this region could be depleted in as few as 15 years. Sweetwater used to call itself the wind energy capital of Texas. They even have an annual rattlesnake roundup that draws visitors from all over the state. But wind energy jobs are seasonal and sparse, and the oil work that used to fill in the gaps has dried up almost as fast as the aquifer below. Drive through Sweetwater on a Tuesday afternoon, and you'll see what a slow bleed looks like in real time. Gas stations that are open but empty. A strip mall with one occupied storefront out of 5. A high school football stadium that seats more people than the town can reliably produce on a Friday night. The bones of a thriving community are all still there. The people just aren't. For Sweetwater, the math is simple. Fewer jobs, fewer people, less water, lower prices. Nobody's panicking yet. But nobody's building new subdivisions either. Number 10. La Mesa. About an hour and a half north of Sweetwater, you'll find La Mesa, a Dawson County farm town that sits squarely on top of the Ogallala aquifer. And when we say on top of it, we mean the way you'd sit on top of a slowly deflating air mattress, with decreasing confidence and increasing discomfort. La Mesa's population has fallen nearly 10% since 2020, dropping to around 7,800 residents, and the housing market has gone from sluggish to genuinely ugly. One reporting period showed median sale prices down over 25% year over year, though the sample size was tiny, just 3 sales in a single month. The broader trend from neighborhood-level data tracking shows appreciation rates running about negative 4.5%, which is the kind of number that makes accountants cry. The water situation underneath La Mesa is the same slow-motion disaster playing out across the entire Texas Panhandle. The Ogallala has dropped 44 feet since the mid-20th century, according to federal geological surveys, and the rate isn't slowing down. Farmers in Dawson County depend on that. Water for irrigation, which means the aquifer is being pulled from both sides, agriculture and municipal supply. The cotton fields around La Mesa tell the story before you even get into town. In a good year, they stretch green to the horizon. In a bad year, and there have been a lot of bad years, they're brown and sparse, the plants spaced so far apart that the red dirt between them is the dominant color. Every farmer in Dawson County knows the Ogallala is declining. They've watched their well outputs drop over the decades. Some have switched to drip irrigation to conserve. Others have let fields go fallow. And a few have sold out entirely, adding their acreage to the growing list of dormant farmland in the county. If you're thinking about buying cheap land in La Mesa, you can absolutely do that. Homes in the low hundreds are available. Just understand that affordable and good investment are two very different things when the ground beneath the property is slowly giving up its most important resource. Number 9. Vernon. Vernon is a small city of about 9,700 people in Will Barger County, up near the Oklahoma border. It's the kind of place where the Dairy Queen is a legitimate social landmark, and that's not an insult. That's just how small-town Texas works. What makes Vernon unique on this list is that the entire city runs on groundwater from the Seymour aquifer. There is no backup surface water supply, no reservoir, no lake to tap into if the aquifer gets stressed. And the aquifer has gotten stressed. During the drought of record, the Seymour's static water level dropped to just under 37 feet, its lowest point ever recorded according to the city's own drought contingency plan. Population has been sliding for years, down about 3.5% since the last census, and home prices are forecast to decline another 3.5%. The real estate market in Vernon is so thin that monthly data often produces bizarre results. There are months where the numbers suggest values jumped or crashed by triple digits, but those swings come from just a handful of transactions in a market where almost nothing changes hands. Vernon has a small college, a county hospital, and a Walmart that acts as the economic anchor for the entire region. When Walmart is your economic anchor, you're in a fundamentally different conversation than cities that have diversified employment bases and municipal rainy day funds. Vernon's city government knows the aquifer is a ticking clock, and the drought contingency plan reads less like a strategy document and more like a prayer that rain shows up before the next budget cycle. This is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Vernon isn't dying because something dramatic happened. Vernon is dying because nothing happened. No new industry moved in. No new water source was developed. No population boom materialized. The town just kept getting a little bit smaller, a little bit drier, and a little bit cheaper, year after year until the trend line became the whole story. Number 8. Raymondville. Raymondville sits in Willacy County down in the Rio Grande Valley. And if you've ever wanted to see what happens when a town's primary water source is shared between two countries that can't agree on anything, this is your case study. The Rio Grande supplies almost all of the valley's drinking water, and the river has been running dangerously low thanks to a combination of drought, overconsumption, and a long-running water treaty dispute between the United States and Mexico. Mexico currently owes roughly 900,000 acre-feet of water deliveries under the 1944 treaty. And that deficit has been building for years with no resolution in sight. Down in Raymondville, the impact shows up on Zillow listings that nobody clicks. Days on market have stretched past 200 in some reporting periods. One snapshot from Redfin showed the median sale price in Willacy County at $190,000, down 35% year over year. Now, that number comes from just 7 transactions, so take it with a grain of salt. But even the more conservative estimates have Zillow forecasting a nearly 7% decline for the area. The population is ticking downward too, settling around 10,000. And the Rio Grande Valley as a whole is one of the poorest regions in the entire country, which means there's no deep reservoir of private wealth or corporate investment waiting to bail out the water system. Raymondville's downtown tells the story better than any spreadsheet. Low-slung brick buildings with faded paint. A courthouse that's seen better decades. Listing signs on properties that have been for sale long enough that the realtor's phone number starts with a prefix that nobody recognizes anymore. The valley has always been overlooked by Austin and Washington, and the water crisis is making that neglect impossible to ignore. The problem for Raymondville is that the fix, if there ever is one, depends on international diplomacy between two governments that can't agree on what day of the week it is, let alone how to split a shrinking river. If you're finding any of this helpful or wildly entertaining in a dark sort of way, tap that like button. It actually helps more than you think, and it gives me the serotonin I need to keep researching municipal water crises at 2 in the morning. Number 7. Robert Lee. Robert Lee is a tiny Coke County town of about 1,000 people, and its name comes up in every conversation about Texas water for one reason. During the 2011 to 2012 drought, Robert Lee almost completely ran out of water, and the mayor at the time, John Jacobs, said something that became a regional wake-up call. He called his town the canary in the coal mine. The town's water supply comes from E.V. Spence Reservoir, which dropped below 1% capacity during that drought. 1%. The reservoir is a massive body of water when full, stretching across the Colorado River Basin in West Texas. And it was essentially empty. The town had to pipe in emergency water from the neighboring community of Bronte just to keep the faucets running. As of August 2026, E.V. Spence is sitting at about 10.7% full, roughly 52 feet below its normal level. That's not an emergency yet, but it's not comfortable either. Robert Lee's median home values hover in the $60,000 to $70,000 range. For a town that small with that kind of water history, property isn't something people invest in. It's something they inherit or abandon. What makes Robert Lee's story so haunting is how preventable it feels in hindsight. E.V. Spence Reservoir was built in the 1960s to serve a region that assumed rainfall patterns would stay consistent. They didn't. The reservoir filled and drained and filled again over the decades, but each recovery cycle brought it back a little less than before. And in 2011, when Texas experienced its worst single-year drought on record, Spence didn't just drop, it nearly disappeared. Boat ramps led to nothing but cracked mud. The shoreline retreated hundreds of yards. Fishkill reports made the local paper for weeks. Robert Lee survived that crisis, but surviving is different from thriving, and the town has been stuck in survival mode ever since. The population hasn't recovered, the home values haven't bounced, and the reservoir 15 years later is still sitting at roughly 10%. The canary dropped, and the people standing around the mine entrance are still deciding whether or not to walk inside. Number 6. Zapata. Zapata County sits right on the border with Mexico, and its identity is wrapped around Falcon Lake, a binational reservoir that used to be a fishing destination and a symbol of cross-border cooperation. Today, Falcon Lake looks more like a warning label. The reservoir has been hovering around 9 to 13% capacity. The waterline has receded so far that communities along the shore have had to extend their intake pipes and install auxiliary pumps just to reach what's left. Imagine turning on your garden hose and having to run it across 2 football fields to reach the water. That's essentially what Zapata County is doing right now at industrial scale. Home values along the Falcon Lake corridor are taking the hit you'd expect. One submarket near Falcon Mesa showed a median sale price drop of nearly 17% year over year. Zillow's broader forecast for Zapata projected about a 5% decline, which sounds mild until you realize these homes were already affordable. A 5% drop on a $150,000 property isn't a rounding error. It's a truck payment. The timing of what happened next is almost too perfect. While Falcon Lake was shrinking, the Amistad Reservoir upstream hit its own record low in 2024. Total basin storage across the entire Rio Grande system dropped to around 26% of capacity, and Mexico's water debt kept growing. The Amistad situation is worth pausing on because it shows how interconnected this entire system is. Amistad and Falcon are the 2 major reservoirs on the lower Rio Grande. When one drops, it puts more pressure on the other. When both drop, every city and farm downstream starts making contingency plans. And in Zapata County, the contingency plan is basically, hope it rains in Mexico. There used to be a thriving bass fishing culture around Falcon Lake. Tournaments would bring anglers from across the country. Lakeside businesses sold bait, rented boats, and served catfish plates to tourists who drove down from San Antonio for the weekend. A lot of that economy has evaporated along with the water. Boat launches that used to sit at the water's edge now require a long walk across cracked sediment. Marina docks that used to float are sitting on dry land. For Zapata, the situation is a water crisis, a housing crisis, and a foreign policy crisis all stacked on top of each other. And the fishing tournament scene has definitely seen better days. Number 5. Kerrville. Now, Kerrville is a different animal from every other city on this list. It's in the Texas Hill Country, which is one of the most desirable real estate regions in the entire state. Retirees love it, weekenders love it. People who want a 30-minute drive to a winery and a 45-minute drive to San Antonio really love it. But the Guadalupe River, which supplies about 80 to 90% of Kerrville's drinking water, has been running at roughly a quarter of its normal flow rate. In April of 2025, the river was measured at just 22 cubic feet per second, compared to a typical 90. The city entered Stage 3 drought restrictions, then moved to Stage 4, which is the "we're not joking around anymore" phase. Now, 3 of 4 monitoring wells in the area were reading at extreme drought levels by the end of 2024, and the situation carried into a third consecutive drought year through 2025. Now, here's what makes Kerrville fascinating. Home prices here haven't cratered. The hill country market is still strong compared to the rest of this list. Kendall, Blanco, and Gillespie counties are among the priciest in Texas, but the water stress is real, and it's building. If the Guadalupe River doesn't recover, at some point buyers are going to start asking the question that realtors in the hill country dread. What happens if the water runs out in a place where a 3-bedroom house costs $400,000? The hill country has always been marketed on lifestyle. Clean air, scenic rivers, small town charm with big city proximity. Take the river out of that pitch, and you're selling people a very expensive house on a very dry hill with a 45-minute drive to the nearest grocery store that carries organic produce. The river is the entire value proposition, and right now the river is barely there. Kerrville isn't in Freefall, but it's standing at the edge of the cliff, looking down, and the Guadalupe River is the only guardrail. If you've been watching this far, you're clearly someone who pays attention to the details that actually matter in real estate, not just the Zillow estimate and the kitchen countertops. If that sounds like you, subscribe to the channel. We cover stories like this every week, the kind of stuff that helps you make smarter decisions about where to live, where to invest, and where to run away from. Now let's talk about the city that earned the number 4 spot. And honestly, this one might be the saddest entry on the entire list, so here's where things get genuinely bleak. Number 4, Big Spring. Big Spring, Texas, earned a distinction in 2026 that no city wants. According to an Axios analysis of census data, Big Spring lost 15.3% of its population since 2020, making it the fastest shrinking city of its size in the entire United States. Not Texas. The country. The town, which sits in Howard County in the heart of the Permian Basin, went from over 26,000 residents to roughly 21,000 in just 6 years. And the two events that drove the collapse weren't subtle. First, oil prices tanked, which gutted the Permian Basin economy. Second, 2 federal detention centers in Big Spring closed in 2021, wiping out a significant chunk of the local employment base in a single year. Zillow forecasted a 9% decline in home prices for Big Spring, one of the steepest projected drops of any city in Texas. The water supply comes from the Colorado River Municipal Water District, and its reservoirs, including EV Spence, have been running low for years. Picture a main street in West Texas. Storefronts with "for lease" signs in the windows. A couple of trucks parked outside a diner that closes at 2. A real estate office with laminated listings in the window that have been bleaching in the sun long enough that you can't read the prices anymore. The detention center closures hit particularly hard because they weren't just jobs. They were the kind of stable, benefits-included federal employment that small towns build entire middle classes around. Guards, administrators, food service workers, medical staff. When those 2 facilities shut down, it wasn't like a restaurant closing. It was like a small hospital and a school district, vanishing at the same time. The ripple effects touched every business in town. The taco shop that fed the morning shift, the gas station that filled up the commuter cars, The landlords who rented to the staff, all of it contracted. That's Big Spring right now. Not a ghost town, but a town that's slowly losing the argument for its own existence. And the water supply is just one more variable in an equation that's already underwater in every other sense of the word. Number 3, Pecos. If Big Spring is sad, Pecos is alarming. This Reeves County city on the western edge of the Permian Basin has lost over 30% of its population since the 2020 census, dropping from about 13,000 residents to under 9,000. That's a decline of over 7% per year, which isn't a slow fade. That's an evacuation. Zillow flagged Pecos with the largest projected price decline of any Texas market it tracked, forecasting a drop of over 12%. Housing values are in the mid-$80,000 to $90,000 range, and even at those prices, the trajectory is pointed firmly downward. The water situation in Pecos mirrors the broader West Texas problem. The city sits along the Pecos River, which has been declining, and over aquifers that are being drawn down by a combination of municipal use, agriculture, and the oil industry. When the Permian Basin was booming, water was being consumed at staggering rates. Now that the boom has turned into something closer to a whimper, the water demand has eased slightly, but the supply never recovered. This decision seemed small at the time. It wasn't. When Pecos tied its entire economy to the oil industry, it worked brilliantly for about a decade. During the boom years, Pecos actually had a housing shortage. Man camps popped up outside town. Hotels were booked solid for months. A one-bedroom apartment that would go for $600 anywhere else was renting for $1,500 because oil workers needed somewhere to sleep. And then the bust came, and all those temporary residents left the same way they arrived, quickly and without looking back. The man camps emptied out, the hotels dropped their rates, the apartments went vacant, and the permanent residents of Pecos, the ones who were there before the boom and stayed through the bust, were left holding property in a town where summer temperatures regularly push past 105 degrees, and the nearest target is 2 hours away. If Pecos had stopped here, this would be a very different story. A boom and bust cycle in an oil town is practically a genre in Texas. But the water situation underneath Pecos turns a cyclical problem into a structural one. You can survive an oil bust if the next boom is coming. You can't survive an aquifer depletion. Number 2, Beeville. Beeville is where the list shifts from slow decline into full-blown emergency. This B County city of about 13,000 people declared a local state of disaster in October 2025, and the reason was as simple as it was terrifying. The two reservoirs that supply the region, Lake Corpus Christi and Choke Canyon, had dropped to 14.5% and 11.3% capacity, respectively. And if that were the only problem, Beeville might have survived it with a few conservation measures and some stern letters from City Hall. But Beeville's response went much further. The city issued $35 million in municipal debt to fund an emergency groundwater desalination project. That works out to roughly $2,600 per resident in new debt, just to keep drinking water available. Think about that for a second. You live in Beeville, Texas. You own a modest home. Your city just took on $35 million in bonds because the lakes that supply your tap water are almost empty. Your property taxes are about to reflect that debt. And your home value? It's not going up anytime soon. The desalination project is a real solution, not a band-aid. Groundwater desalination takes brackish water from underground, strips out the salt, and produces clean drinking water. It works. Cities around the world use it, but it's expensive to build, expensive to run, and in Beeville's case, it's being financed by a city of 13,000 people who didn't exactly have a surplus in the budget before the reservoirs started vanishing. And here's the detail that nobody in real estate wants to talk about. When a city takes on that much emergency debt, the carrying cost gets baked into property taxes for decades. That means every homeowner in Beeville is going to be paying for this water fix long after the reservoirs have either recovered or been permanently replaced by desalination. If you're a potential buyer comparing Beeville to a city 30 miles away that didn't take on $35 million in water debt, which one are you choosing? Beeville isn't dying, it's surviving. And survival mode is not a marketing pitch that attracts new homebuyers. Number 1. Corpus Christi. And now we arrive at the city that ties this entire list together. Corpus Christi, a coastal metro of over 300,000 people, is the anchor of the South Texas water crisis. And everything we've talked about for the last 20 minutes, the disasters, the emergency wells, the collapsing reservoir levels, all of it radiates outward from what's happening in Nueces County. Lake Corpus Christi and Choke Canyon Reservoir together supply drinking water to the city and its surrounding communities. By early 2026, Lake Corpus Christi had dropped to just over 9% of capacity, and Choke Canyon was below 8%. City officials called these the lowest levels in the entire history of both reservoirs. Not in recent memory. In their history. To put that in perspective, Choke Canyon fell from 47% all the way down to 11% between October 2021 and October 2025. 4 years and 90% of the reservoir's remaining water just vanished into consumption, evaporation, and drought. The city's response was aggressive but controversial. Corpus Christi began drilling emergency wells into the Evangeline aquifer starting in January 2025. And that's where the story takes a darker turn. Because in rural Jim Wells County, just outside Alice, those emergency wells started pulling water out from under private landowners. A retired resident named Bruce Mumme told Inside Climate News that his well dropped below his pump and left him without water for 3 days. He paid $30,000 for a backup well and still said, and this is close to a direct quote, that he fears his property and house are essentially worthless now. Alice, the county seat of Jim Wells, issued its own disaster declaration in April 2026, stating plainly that regional water demand was exceeding available supply. Three Rivers, further south along Choke Canyon, went even further, publicly accusing Corpus Christi of draining the reservoir and leaving smaller communities to fight over the scraps. Orange Grove and Aransas Pass followed with their own emergency declarations within days. Corpus Christi's home prices have held up better than the small towns, probably because it's a real metro with a military base, a port, and enough economic diversity to keep buyers interested. Zillow shows average values around $222,000, down about 3%. But the city itself projected that it could hit a level 1 water emergency, meaning supply literally cannot meet demand, as early as November 2026. Some rains in mid-2026 may have pushed that timeline out towards 2028, but the structural problem hasn't been solved. The reservoirs didn't magically refill. They got a temporary reprieve. And that's the part that should worry anyone holding property in the region. The crisis in Corpus Christi is not a one-year drought problem. It's a decades-long supply problem that finally caught up. The reservoirs are undersized for the population. The aquifers are being drilled by everyone at once. And the rain, when it comes, doesn't come in the amounts needed to actually fix anything. This story isn't just about Corpus Christi. It's about every small town in its orbit. Beeville, Alice, Three Rivers, Orange Grove, Aransas Pass. That depends on the same water and has even fewer resources to deal with the shortage. When Corpus Christi sneezes, these towns don't catch a cold. They catch pneumonia. And that distinction matters because Corpus Christi is fundamentally different from the West Texas oil towns on this list. Those places are shrinking because people are leaving voluntarily. Nobody's forcing anyone out of Pecos or Big Spring. But in the Corpus Christi region, the water itself is making the decision. You can choose to stay in a town with a bad economy. You cannot choose to stay in a town with no water. And that difference is what makes the South Texas crisis fundamentally more dangerous to property values than anything happening in the Permian Basin. 11 cities, 11 water crises, 11 housing markets that are sending a very clear message. If the water goes, the value goes with it. If you made it to the end of this video, you are a real one, and I genuinely appreciate you watching. Subscribe if you haven't already because we cover stories exactly like this every single week. The stuff that actually matters if you're thinking about where to live, where to move, or where to get out of before the market figures out what you already know. I'll see you in the next one.